and welcome to ILTV's Israel Weekly. I'm Aaron Porras, and with me today to discuss the latest geopolitical developments in Israel are Professor Moshe Amirav from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and founder and executive director of the Israel Institute for Strategic Studies, Dr. Martin Sherman. Today our topics cover renewed American-led efforts for peace negotiations and the future of the Palestinian Authority itself. So first, United States President Trump will soon send his top aides to the Middle East, Jason Greenblatt and Jared Kushner, in his first major attempt at bringing peace to the region. The stakes couldn't be higher either, though, as tensions are still simmering following clashes in Jerusalem, followed by Jordan distancing itself from Israel and cozying up to the PA. Then there's coordinating all the involved nations like the Arab Gulf states and Egypt, and of course starting on shaky ground after a leaked recording placed none other than Jared Kushner saying, quote, "There may be no solution." The question remains, what do Israel and the Palestinian Authority have to say?
הנשיא טראמפ ישלח בקרוב את נציגיו ג'ארד קושנר וג'ייסון גרינבלט לשיחות באזור, כולל כמובן בירושלים, לנסות להתניע תהליך מדיני. אנחנו כמובן נקבל אותם בברכה כתמיד.
So, Professor Amirav, I'd like to start with you. What are the prospects for a peace negotiation under the Trump administration?
I'm optimistic about it. The problem is that I'm optimistic for the last 40 years. And I believe that today, if the way President Trump sees it as a business, as a kind of a meeting in which both sides will go out with a lot of benefits, and if he will really be involved in it, it gives a chance, because I was telling you before with President Clinton in the same deja vu.
Sure.
And Clinton was very neutral in the negotiation. I was advisor to Prime Minister Barak. Clinton said, whatever you say, I'm not pushing you, I'm not pushing you. If you can come to terms, I will bless you and I will get even the money and the support of America.
So I guess my point, though, is, currently there's not even really a set date for the Palestinian Authority and the Israeli government to sit down together. Right now, this is all, kind of rhetorical to a degree. So what's to make us think that this visit will be anything more important?
I don't think there's anything to make us think it'll be more important. I think the whole vision of a consensual peace with the Palestinians has been always a hazardous hallucination. And I hope that Jared Kushner's recent statement that there may be no solution is the dawn of a new era of understanding the realities. Because the kind of bargain that has to be struck between us and the Palestinians, if you believe that they really want some sort of consensual peace with us, and I'm skeptical about this, but if you happen to believe that, the structure of the bargain is insoluble, because the maximum that Israel can offer the Palestinians and still preserve its minimal security needs is far less than the minimum than the Palestinians can accept to realize their national aspirations. And I think that we're headed for another impasse. And I think we should really understand here that when you talk about peace, what kind of peace is feasible? First of all, we have to recognize what the Palestinians really are. The Palestinians have proved for a quarter of a century that they are an implacable enemy and not a prospective peace partner.
I'm sorry, continue.
So the word peace basically is both a dictatorial word and a deceptive word. Why dictatorial? Because no one can oppose peace like you can't oppose a dictator. But it's deceptive because it can describe two opposite geopolitical situations. On the one hand, you can have peace, meaning mutual harmony, and ongoing relations, free exchange of ideas, people, etc., etc. On the other hand, peace can be non-belligerence maintained by deterrence. And it's very important that you identify which kind of condition you're in, because if you're in the condition when only a peace of deterrence is possible, trying to achieve a peace of harmony by making concessions is very dangerous. It's not bringing peace closer, it's bringing a war closer, because you're undermining your deterrence posture. And I think that's what's happened for the last quarter of a century in Israel. And since Israel embarked on this unfortunate land for peace path, we've been undermining our deterrence and making the Palestinians feel that they're strong, they need to make no more concessions. And I think this has to stop.
So what can be done? I mean, because I know that you would, I think, disagree with what Dr. Sherman just said? That,
Of course.
Okay, so how would you respond?
Yeah, I think that analysis of the past shows that we said for many years, Israelis, there is no partner. Even Golda Meir said about Egypt, he's not a partner, Sadat. Suddenly came another prime minister, and Sadat became a partner. And then we had peace. And there were many who said we will never have peace with Jordan. And then came a very courageous prime minister, and he made peace with Hussein. And this is the situation here too, with the Palestinians. What we need is two courageous leaders who will make peace. It's possible. I really believe it's possible.
So let's talk about what...
I'm optimistic because of the past, not because I'm by nature optimistic.
May I interject?
Right.
May I interject? Because I really must comment on Professor Amirav's optimism. You know, when this process started, there were two people. The Israeli public was divided more or less 50-50. There were opponents who warned of the dangers and proponents who promised benefits. Now, a quarter of a century later, with blood and destruction and death and trauma and tragedy, nearly all the dangers that the opponents warned of materialized, and none of the benefits that the proponents promised benefited. So at some stage you must decide who's right. So I cannot for the life of me understand why Professor Amirav, on the basis of the empirical evidence and in the absence of any theoretical argument that could predict the success of this, I cannot understand why he's optimistic. And I think optimism in this case is dangerous. You know, it's like someone who jumps off a 20-story building and when he gets to the 15th story is praising the breeze and the view. So I think optimism here is very dangerous, and to carry down a path that has failed consistently for a quarter of a century is irresponsible.
So I'd like to talk about, you know, like let's take the proactive approach, I suppose, and assume that a peace plan is possible. Well, what would that look like? Is Hamas involved, and to what degree? How can we deal with them when Abbas and Hamas is, you know, when the Fatah and Abbas are still completely separate and at odds? Abbas himself has lost a lot of recognition and authority across the Palestinian territories. So what would a peace plan look like? How would such a thing be implemented?
It's very simple because we are dealing with, it's the third peace that we are going to achieve if we achieve after Egypt, when most of the Israeli population didn't believe that we can have peace with Egypt. And even people in the Likud party of Menachem Begin were against him. They say there will never be peace with Egypt, and if it will be broken after a year or two. And then we had another prime minister with Jordan. And we have peace, and it's not a year or two. We are having this peace. And that's why I'm optimistic. I'm looking backward, and I see.
But the facts are different between the Palestinians and Jordan and Egypt. I mean, these are different.
Why is it different?
Well, again, I mean, you were dealing with a centralized government with each of the previous cases. With the Palestinian Authority, there is no centralized authority that is recognized unilaterally across the Palestinian territories. Hamas, case in point, they haven't really been respecting historically Abbas's dictates and his authority.
So why are we not having peace with Abbas?
Well, so that's kind of my question, and what would that even look like? Because that's not, if Abbas is not recognized by Gaza, then what does that peace plan look like? Does it exclude Gaza? Do we just forget about the Palestinians living in the Gaza Strip?
First of all, it's separated today, so we have to deal with the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority, we can reach peace with them. Even the current prime minister knows it. The differences are not so big. We are very close, and I'm very optimistic about the effort of the new American president to reach peace very soon. I think it should be in a different way. I think we have to have the Arab League in it. We have to negotiate with the three parties, not only the Americans, not only the Palestinians, but also the Arab world, which will help us in reaching peace with the Palestinians. The Palestinians today is, for me, for that matter, it's Abbas. And if it will not be Abbas, it will be somebody else from the Fatah, from the more liberal stream in the PLO.
Dr. Sherman, I feel like you want to interject.
Abbas is only the incumbent president, and we must say, you know, in his 11th term of his 4-year elected incumbency, is only there because the IDF is deployed in the areas of Judea and Samaria. The minute the IDF withdraws and hands over the rule to Abbas, there is no reason to believe that what happened in Gaza won't happen here. And I just cannot believe that given the last half century, as I said, of trauma and tragedy, that anyone wants to repeat this experiment. And looking at Egypt and at Jordan is a little bit deceptive, because Jordan, we were never at war with Jordan anyway, and what's happening in Jordan is not particularly encouraging for the shelf life of the peace with us, because there are more and more anti-Israeli sentiment there. The opponents of the king are becoming stronger and stronger and more vocal and vocal. And I think the working assumption, the plausible working assumption, or the prudent working assumption for Israel is that the regime there will not endure, and then you don't know what the fate of the peace agreement is. The same thing happened in Egypt, by the way. It was just pure luck, nothing to do with the Israeli policy, that the Muslim Brotherhood was deposed. If the Muslim Brotherhood wasn't deposed, we would have a completely different reality. And what's happening in Sinai is also very disturbing. Because of the demilitarization, which was the only real achievement of the peace agreement, the place has descended into a jihadi warlord's paradise, a very brutal place. And we don't know if the present government will have the resolve or the resources to impose law and order. And if they can't, we're going to have a very problematic situation on our southern border.
Well, the current government, I'm glad that you've both touched on that a little bit, and that's actually our next topic, is that we're going to talk about what many are calling the end of the Abbas era and what the future of the Palestinian movement may hold. Now, Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas has, over the past 3 decades, skillfully positioned himself as the keystone of the Palestinian world. He's even been chairing Arafat's PLO since 2004, as well as both the state and Palestine, the State of Palestine and the Palestinian National Authority since 2005, the 2 biggest political organizations in the Palestinian world. Now, his term was originally 4 years, but in 2009, the PLO, which he heads, voted him to be president indefinitely. Now, in the 13th year of his presidency, at 83 years old and with questionable health, the big question is who could fill his shoes, if anyone? The lack of answers is making both Palestinians and Israelis worry. Now, so my first question is there a replacement for Abbas? Because you have Saeb Erekat, who needs a lung transplant desperately. You have Mohammed Dakhlan, who was a nephew of Arafat, and he's now in exile. You have Marwan Barghouti, who's in prison for a life sentence. If Abbas were to leave tomorrow, who would replace him, seeing as how you just a moment ago said that he was our major partner in Palestine?
Yes, I think the names you mentioned, and there are some other names. I think it's too early to get into these speculations. And I can tell you that Abbas is presenting the Fatah, which is the main, not religious part of the regime. It's a regime with, I would say that there are some names, some I know personally, that can replace him. But we have to understand that when Abbas came to power, he actually continued the policy of the former president, Arafat.
Many people would dispute that, by the way.
And and the one who will replace him will go in the same route, which means we have to have peace with Israel, and we have our demands. 1, 2, 3, 4. These are the demands that was presented in Camp David many years ago by Arafat. Now Abbas is saying it, and the next one will say the same thing. It's not going to be any big change in the Palestinian policy if Abbas leaves.
Shimon Peres wrote a book in 1977 called Tomorrow Is Now, where he made a very strong argument against Palestinian statehood and made territorial concessions. But one of the sentences that he wrote in the book is, I think, very pertinent here. He said, the point is not to sign an agreement. The point is to have the agreement implemented in practice. And the point is, I'll agree with you, you may be able to sign an agreement, but I'm very skeptical about the shelf life of that agreement. And of all the names you've mentioned here as a successor to Abbas, the one name which was missing and which should be taken very seriously was whoever heads the Hamas. Because once the IDF pulls out there, I really do not believe that there's any reason to believe that what happened in Gaza will not happen in Judea and Samaria, and that must be the working assumption of our policy. And so what are you going to do? What are you going to do with an Islamist state perched on the hills overlooking the coastal plain, our major airport, nearly all our seaports, the centers of government, vital infrastructure installations? Why would you want to take that chance? On what basis? You know, and the regime in Jordan is not stable either. So you may have this massive landmass of Islamist extremism pushing against the narrow waist of Israel. Why would you possibly want to take a chance of that with the Jewish nation state? Why?
What I'm saying is that we don't have any other choice but to take chances. Yeah, it's a very unstable area here, and there were many who said the same things he's saying now about Begin when he went to have peace with Egypt. The same things he's saying now.
Still saying them today.
They spoke about Rabin. They said, how can we have peace with Jordan? And they did it. They were very courageous men. So what we need is not this fear of the unknown. What we need is leaders who are ready to go. I'm skeptical if both sides have these leaders who are ready to go today and sign peace.
Well, Professor Amirav, we've seen the result of courageous leaders in Israel. They resulted in many deaths, many injuries in Gaza, pulling out of Judea and Samaria. And I'm quite sure that if Yitzhak Rabin had a crystal ball and he could see, the minute before he signed the Oslo agreements, what they would have brought to his people, the death and the destruction and the blood in the streets and the exploded buses and a wall across around Gaza, not only many stories above ground but many stories below ground. So can you imagine if you have to build a wall 10 times that length on our eastern front? If Yitzhak Rabin had seen what his signature of his courage, so-called courage, brought by signing the agreement with the Oslo agreements, I cannot believe he would have signed it.
The question is if Netanyahu and if President Trump are ready to take this risk that he is speaking about.
And why would they? On what basis? On what basis would they take
all I'm
them?
saying is that from my perspective as a professor who is analyzing the past, is that there were many courageous people here and in
Who brought
the Arab
disaster
world
to their people.
who had peace with us. They took the chance. The president of Egypt took a chance and was assassinated, and we still have peace.
If Morsi stayed in power, or the Muslim Brotherhood reassert themselves in Egypt, how long do you think the peace will last?
I don't know.
Well, you know,
all
that's
these speculations. We can be frightened
that's
with all
the
these
question.
speculations. We cannot sleep at night.
Let me give you one
I think that's a
scenario.
good point. I want to kind of steer away from pure speculation. Actually, I'd like to bring the focus a little bit back towards the power vacuum and who might actually fill it, because you mentioned Hamas, and polls that I've been following recently show that, at least in the West Bank, Hamas is not as popular as we would like to believe. You know, the Palestinian citizenship is looking at Gaza and what's going on there under the Hamas leadership, and I'm not sure that they're. I wouldn't imagine that they would be terribly excited by that.
Well,
but there are other groups in the West Bank that I think are of concern, and Fatah, it seems, would lose out with Abbas, that it will disappear with Abbas. Is there any sort of evidence that a moderate candidate would actually replace him? Because so far, I mean, we still don't really have any solid names that could garner any meaningful support in the Palestinian territory.
I don't know. Is Abbas a moderate? Is Abbas a moderate leader according to what he is considered by you?
I'd say he would be considered to be.
Okay, because I remember him when he was not the leader still. Arafat was the leader, and he was one of the hawks. He was very extreme in his relationship to Israel when he was number 2 or 3 in the hierarchy of the Fatah. And when he came to power, he became a dove. He became very, I would say, representative for us, saying we can have peace with him. And Israel thinks that he is a moderate leader. So maybe the next one will also be moderate.
You know, going back to what you said before about the popularity of Hamas in Judea and Samaria, Well, you know, I'm not sure that they'll win by the ballot, but they've always got the option of the bullet. And so the fact that they may not win an election doesn't mean they won't seize power. And even more extreme organizations there, because we know that there are Salafist organizations trying to build power there. So I don't think that the relative popularity of Hamas or any other Islamists in public opinion polls is a real coefficient or real measure of their ability to seize control once Israel withdraws. And I think this is something they have to take very seriously, because there's no reason to believe that they won't.
Do you think Israel would unilaterally annex portions of Judea and Samaria should there be a power vacuum?
I think Israel should have annexed all of Judea and Samaria many years ago.
Well, I mean,
I think I've been saying this now for at least 2 or 3 decades, that Israel should have annexed Judea and Samaria and dealt with the Arab presence there in non-coercive ways, trying to reduce the Arab presence by economic inducements and to encourage Arab immigration. And if you look what's happening in Gaza today, I'm sure that if people in Gaza were offered economic inducements to leave, they would seize it with great enthusiasm, because reports are saying that people in Gaza are paying very high prices to have smugglers get them out of there and to extricate themselves from the self-rule by Hamas.
No, I'm sorry.
No, so I would say that if economic inducements were offered the Palestinians to find a better and more secure life in third-party countries, outside the circle of violence, and free from the control of the cruel, corrupt cliques that have controlled their lives for decades and led them from disaster to disaster, I'm sure an offer like that would have eagerly be accepted by many of the non-belligerent Palestinians there who don't have a stake in the small kernel of the leadership there.
All right. Well, unfortunately, that is all the time we have today. Now, to finish our show, I'd like to end on a positive note. This is a fairly new segment, so let's get some final thoughts. A short one-sentence silver lining about the topics that we've discussed today. Professor Amirav, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, I'm optimistic about Trump initiative. I believe that in less than a year we will have peace with the Palestinians. We cannot deal with the Palestinians. We will deal with the Arab world, the Arab League, and you will see, you will invite me next year to this place right here, and we will speak about it, about my promise to you, that we are going to have peace with Trump in a year.
I would absolutely love that.
Okay.
Well, we must remember that the Arab League is composed of some of the most decadent and dictatorial regimes in the world, and I certainly wouldn't want to bet my security on their agreement or their commitment to such a deal.
And the silver lining?
The silver lining is my silver lining is that I hope Kushner's statement that people are beginning to realize that there is no consensual solution, and that pursuit of such a unachievable deal is beginning to dawn, and that people will take a different, more realistic route along the lines that I've suggested earlier.
Well, I'd like to believe that the silver lining here will certainly be that there will be a peace process. I would love if it was within a year or even sooner. That would be absolutely fantastic. And as for another Hamas kind of outpost in the West Bank, I think we're all crossing our fingers that that sort of thing will never happen. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today for this edition of ILTV's Israel Weekly. Professor Amirav and Dr. Sherman, thank you very much for coming into the program again, and thanks to all of you for tuning in. See you next week, and shalom from Israel.